Stories Fables Ghostly Tales, the podcast.
The Case of April Tinsley. When people in Fort Wayne talk about this case, even decades later, there's something almost always the same in the way they start, with the feeling of how ordinary life was before it happened. Not how unsafe the city was, not how scary the streets felt, but how normal it all was, how familiar, how unremarkable. That's where the story begins, because what didn't seem significant then became everything later. Her name was April Tinsley. She was 8 years old when she walked out the door that Friday afternoon in spring 1988, expecting to come back home. And for decades afterward, people would keep returning to the same idea. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Let's look at the place. Fort Wayne was a Midwestern city that didn't feel like a place where a child went missing in the middle of the day. In 1988, Fort Wayne was a community shaped by routine and predictability. People knew their neighbors and children walked the same neighborhood routes without worry. It was not a big city, and it wasn't isolated. It felt like the kind of place where community mattered, not as a slogan but as ordinary life. Parents expected kids to come home from school on time. Grocery store clerks recognized the daily faces at the checkout. Playgrounds filled with familiar laughter, and yet the ordinary trust in everyday life is precisely what was broken that spring. Fort Wayne had long been defined by manufacturing. Companies tied to electronics, automotive parts, appliances, and metalwork had built the city's identity throughout the mid-20th century. By the late 1980s, many of those industries were shrinking or automating. Layoffs weren't constant, but they were present enough to create anxiety beneath the surface. People still expected steady work, but fewer believed it was guaranteed for life. Despite this, the city did not feel like it was collapsing. It felt paused, waiting to see what came next. Most families lived in quiet residential neighborhoods with modest single-family homes, trimmed lawns, and cars parked in driveways instead of garages. Children played outside until dusk. Neighbors knew one another by sight, if not by name. It was common to assume that your street was safe, that the danger lived somewhere else, downtown, or on the highway, or in the rough parts of town spoken about but rarely visited. There was a strong sense of routine surrounding school, church, work, Friday night football, Saturday errands, Sunday dinners. That predictability shaped how people understood safety and trust. Downtown Fort Wayne in the late 80s was quieter than it had been decades earlier. Some storefronts were vacant, others were holdovers. Local diners, banks, small offices, shopping malls and strip centers were pulling away from the city core, reinforcing suburban habits. Entertainment was simple and local: movie theaters, bowling alleys, roller rinks, high school sports. Cable TV was common but not overwhelming. News came from the local paper or evening broadcasts, which reinforced the idea that Fort Wayne was insulated from the chaos of larger cities. Culturally, Fort Wayne leaned conservative and traditional. Families valued privacy, order, and respectability. Problems, especially serious ones, were not discussed openly. If something went wrong, it was often handled quietly, behind closed doors. This created a powerful contrast. On the surface, Fort Wayne felt calm, orderly, and safe. Underneath, there were stresses, economic uncertainty, generational change, and social blind spots that came from believing this doesn't happen here. So people trusted systems, they trusted neighbors, they trusted routines, and because of that, when something broke that trust, the shock was profound. Fort Wayne in the late 80s as a whole wasn't defined by fear, it was defined by confidence, quiet streets, predictable lives, and the belief that normalcy was protection. Let's talk about the girl, April, and what we know. What we do know about April Tinsley is grounded entirely in public reporting and official records. There is no authentic archive of her private life that is widely public, so I'm not filling in personal family details from unsourced speculation. But April Mary Tinsley was born in March 1980. She lived with her family on the southeast side of Fort Wayne, where she went to school and walked the neighborhood streets with friends. The kind of routine a parent would never think twice about. To the outside world, she was simply a second grader in a place that felt normal, a girl with a life full of small plans and everyday patterns. Those who knew April described her as a sweet-natured, gentle and polite girl. She wasn't loud or rebellious. She was a child who followed rules, who listened, who trusted adults because she had been taught that adults were safe. She attended the Fairfield Elementary School. She sang in her church children's choir. Music mattered to April. So did routine. School days, church days, playtime after homework. Her life was structured in a way that made sense to a child. Safe places, familiar faces, predictable paths. She liked playing outside, walking short distances on her own, visiting her friends who lived only a few blocks away. Those small walks weren't acts of bravery, they were acts of normalcy. No one saw them as risky, not her parents, not her neighbors, not April herself. April was the kind of child who trusted, not naively but naturally. And she lived in a world to her where adults helped you if you were lost, where neighbors watched out for each other, where a smile meant kindness, not danger. That trust shaped how she interacted with people. It shaped how she moved through her neighborhood, and it shaped her choices. Choices no child should ever have to defend. There is no evidence that she feared anything that day, nothing to suggest that she thought she was in danger. That, in many ways, is the hardest part to sit with. April was deeply loved by her family. She wasn't just a child in the abstract. She was their child, a daughter with a voice they knew by heart. A laugh they could recognize from another room. A presence that filled a house in quiet, everyday ways. After she was gone, that absence became permanent. Her family didn't just lose her once, they lost her every day for decades. Birthdays that never came, milestones that remained imagined, and childhood frozen in memory while the world moved on. They remember her as kind, small, ordinary, and real. And that matters because April Tinsley was not defined by what happened to her. She was defined by who she was before it happened. A little girl who sang, who walked to her friend's house, who trusted her world, and had every reason to believe she could. So yes, to the outside world, she was simply a second grader in a place that felt normal, a girl with a life full of small plans and everyday patterns. The day that started like any other. April's disappearance began with something ordinary, a walk home from school. It was Friday, April the 1st, 1988, a spring day where nothing in the weather or the afternoon suggested danger. She left school as she had done before, walking with other kids along the family neighborhood route near the 2300 block of Hoagland Avenue. At some point along the walk, April fell behind the group. No one saw anything that alarmed them, and there were no reports of shouting, struggling, or screams. The afternoon continued around her, but she didn't make it home. At first, the waiting didn't feel like terror. People told themselves explanations that made room for hope. Maybe she had stopped at her friend's house, maybe she got distracted, maybe someone gave her a ride home. Those are the thoughts people hold because they are survivable. But as time passed, that waiting became anxiety. The sun began to dip. Phones that were supposed to ring stayed silent, and as the hours passed into evening and then to the next day, Fort Wayne residents sensed that something had gone terribly wrong. Police were called, the neighborhood was searched, volunteers joined in, flyers went up. An entire community leaned in to a collective urgency that had never been necessary in that way or ever seen before in Fort Wayne. The search. The search for April was intense from the start. Law enforcement canvassed the neighborhood thoroughly. They checked houses, yards, underbrush, anywhere a child may be found. Volunteers walked blocks with law enforcement. Neighbors stood in doorways, watching, wondering. A photograph of April, her school portrait, was shared widely on flyers and through the local community. But no matter how many places were checked, no matter how many questions were asked, she did not show up. 3 days later, the search ended in a discovery. What was found? In the early days of April's disappearance, law enforcement and family members held onto hope, but on April 4th, 1988, that hope was shattered. April's body was found off a rural road near Hoagland, Indiana, not far from the city, but far enough that it wasn't along her everyday path. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The location and condition of her body told investigators something important. This was not a random act. Whoever took her had both a vehicle and enough confidence to move her a distance away from where she was last seen. The city didn't absorb that information in isolation. Fort Wayne felt it deeply. Now, regarding the abduction, there is speculation on how it occurred. Based on later confessions and behavioral analysis, investigators believe the perpetrator used deception rather than force. The most common theory supported by offender behavior in similar cases is that he approached April in a vehicle, presented himself as non-threatening, used a request or pretext, asking for directions, offering help, or referencing something familiar, relied on authority, politeness, or friendliness rather than intimidation. April was the child raised to listen, to be respectful, and to trust adults. There is no indication she tried to flee or resist at first. That matters not as blame, but as context. Children in the late 1980s were not taught stranger danger in the way they are now. From the evidence, it appears she entered the vehicle voluntarily, believing she was safe. Once inside the vehicle, control would have shifted quickly. Investigators believe the offender acted alone and deliberately, keeping the situation quiet to avoid attention. This explains why no one nearby noticed anything unusual. There is no evidence of prolonged struggle in public view. The crime was not impulsive in execution, it was methodical, even if driven by deeply disordered urges. And being on a rural road, it offered fewer witnesses, isolation, and the thought that it was by someone local, because you would have familiarity with that local environment. The cause of death for this crime was predominantly asphyxiation, and investigators believe it occurred relatively soon after the abduction. What is important and often misunderstood is that there is no evidence she was held for days. The timeline suggests the crime unfolded within a short window after she was taken. This was not a prolonged captivity, it was swift, brutal, and final. And after April's death, Fort Wayne changed. Parents began walking their children home themselves. Routines that once felt safe, a short walk, a quick stop at a friend's house, playing outside after dinner, were altered without anyone fully realizing when it had happened. Investigators pursued hundreds of leads, hundreds of people were interviewed, hundreds of tips were logged, but no arrest was made. For decades, the case was open but unsolved, a ghost of trauma that sat heavily in the community. The letters, a killer who wouldn't stay silent. Then, over the years, something happened that made the case even more chilling. Investigators found that the person responsible had begun communicating in cryptic and brazen ways long after the crime. In 1990, writing was found on the side of a barn near where April's body was recovered. A handwritten scrawl that read something like, "I kill 8-year-old April M. Tinsley. Did you find her other shoe? Ha ha, I will kill again." That message was more than disturbing. That message was more than disturbing. It was a taunt. And in 2004, notes turned up again, this time left with used condoms at different locations, threatening young girls and daring law enforcement to look closer. DNA from those condoms matched DNA found in evidence from April's case. For almost 2 decades, the killer was not just unidentified, he was communicating a sense of power, a belief that he would never be found. The long years before the break. Over the years, investigators never stopped working the case. They revisited evidence again and again, keeping DNA and physical evidence preserved, even as science advanced around them. The letters and taunts provided both chilling insight and DNA that would eventually be crucial. And then, around 2015 and beyond, advances in genetic genealogy, the same kind that helped identify suspects in other cold cases, began to give detectives a tool they didn't have before. So let's look at the evidence in which, well, evidence that would not age. What ultimately solved this case wasn't luck, and it wasn't a sudden confession, it was restraint. From the beginning, investigators preserved physical evidence from April Tinsley's case with the understanding that science might one day catch up. Biological evidence collected in 1988 was carefully stored even when there was no immediate way to fully analyze it. That decision mattered more than anyone could ever have known at the time, because while the case went cold in the public eye, it never went dormant inside the evidence room. By the mid-2010s, law enforcement across the United States began paying close attention to a new investigative method, forensic genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional DNA databases, which rely on profiles from convicted offenders, genetic genealogy allows investigators to compare crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases used by people researching family history. And yes, this isn't the first time in my true crime cases that I've covered this tool as being a key component and fulcrum in deciding on how they find their criminal. In 2017, Fort Wayne police decided it was time to try. They partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in forensic genealogy, and uploaded the unknown DNA profile to a public genealogy database where users had opted into law enforcement matching. This was the turning point. The genealogy work didn't produce a name immediately. Instead, it produced relatives, distant cousins, shared ancestors, branches of a family tree that slowly narrowed. Investigators spent months mapping that tree, ruling out people by age, location, and opportunity. Eventually, one name remained. A man who lived in Fort Wayne in 1988, a man who matched the age range, a man with no criminal record that would have put him in a DNA database. His name was John D. Miller. So here's what's known and well-sourced about John D. Miller in the April Tinsley case. So his age at arrest was 59 in July 2018. His home area was Graubill, Indiana, near Fort Wayne. Reporting at the time emphasized that he lived a relatively low-profile life. For example, public radio reporting noted he lived alone in a mobile home. So how did he come onto police radar after 30 years? Well, this is the part that matters most because it explains why he wasn't caught earlier and why he was caught when he was. So, investigators had DNA evidence connected to the crime from 1988, but for decades it didn't match anyone in traditional law enforcement databases. 2018, Fort Wayne investigators used the genetic genealogy toolset, working with Parabon Nanolabs to build that family tree. Then there was a probable cause affidavit describing how this process narrowed to two surviving brothers, one being John D. Miller. And after surveillance, police performed a trash pull to obtain DNA from discarded items that matched the DNA to the case evidence. This case is frequently referenced in broader discussions of genetic genealogy because it illustrates how a relative's DNA profile can help identify a suspect even if the suspect never uploaded DNA themselves. So what was the actual DNA piece that sealed John's fate? Well, in July 2018, detectives approached Miller covertly and collected discarded DNA from a cigarette he had thrown away. When that DNA was tested, it was a match. It matched the DNA from April Tinsley's murder. It matched the DNA from the condoms left with threatening notes years later. And after 30 years, the case had a suspect who could no longer hide behind anonymity. The arrest. After the arrest, there was a strange quiet that settled over Fort Wayne. Not relief, not exactly peace, just a pause. For years, the case had existed as a question mark, something unresolved that people carry with them, whether they meant to or not. Once a name was attached to it, once the mystery ended, the city had to figure out what it meant to finally know. Because knowing doesn't undo anything, it just changes how you hold it. John D. Miller didn't look like the version of the man people had imagined for decades. By the time he was arrested, he was older, thinner, ordinary in a way that unsettled people who had spent years picturing something else. That ordinariness mattered. It forced the city to confront something uncomfortable. The person responsible hadn't disappeared, he hadn't fled, he had lived on the margins of society. He had lived among them. In the days after the arrest, people began retracing their own memories. They wondered if they'd passed him in the store, worked alongside him, lived near him. Parents who had raised children under the shadow of April's case now realized that the danger hadn't been abstract. It had been local, familiar, and hidden in plain sight. That realization lingered. For April's family, the arrest didn't arrive as celebration. It arrived as gravity. 30 years is a long time to wait for answers, long enough for hope to reshape itself again and again. long enough to live entire lives around a question that never goes away. The confession confirmed what the evidence had already said, but it also ended something else. The waiting. And Miller confessed right after his arrest. He admitted to abducting April Tinsley, sexually assaulting her and killing her. He also admitted to writing the letters and leaving a threatening note over the years. For investigators, the confession confirmed what the evidence had already established. For April's family, it was something else entirely. It was the end of waiting. Now, there was no trial. Miller pleaded guilty, and in doing so spared the family the burden of reliving the details publicly in a courtroom. There would be no jury deliberation, no competing narratives, just accountability. At sentencing, the focus wasn't only on what happened in 1988, but on everything that followed. The years of silence, the taunting letters, the threats that stretched the harm forward in time. The court acknowledged that this wasn't a crime frozen in the past, it had continued, psychologically and emotionally, for decades. When the sentence was handed down, 80 years, it was understood for what it was, permanence. Miller would never be free again. For law enforcement, the resolution of April's case marked something else entirely. It validated a decision made long before anyone knew it would matter. The decision to preserve evidence carefully, even when there was no clear path forward. It proved that patience, when paired with science, could succeed where time alone had failed. April's case became part of a larger shift in policing, a demonstration of how genetic genealogy could identify offenders who had avoided detection for years by simply never being arrested for anything else. It changed how cold cases were viewed, not as dead ends, but as stories still waiting for the right moment to move again. That shift raised new questions too, about privacy, about consent, about how far law enforcement should be allowed to go when building family trees from public DNA databases. April's case didn't answer those questions, but it made them unavoidable. In Fort Wayne, the case became something people referenced without needing to explain. It was shorthand for a moment when the city lost something it never got back. But it was also shorthand for persistence, for refusing to let a child's name fade just because years passed. April Tinsley was 8 years old. She didn't get to choose the way her life ended, or the role her name would play in advancing forensic science decades later. But she mattered. Not because her case was solved with new technology, but because people refused to stop looking. Because someone decided again and again that her story wasn't finished. There's a temptation when a case like this is solved to treat it as closure, to believe that the ending fixes something. It doesn't. What it does is draw a line between what was unknown and what is now certain, between fear without a face and responsibility with a name. That line matters. If you walk through Fort Wayne today, there's nothing that marks the exact place where April fell behind on her walk home. No plaque, no sign. And maybe that's fitting, because this story was never about a single moment. It was about time, about patience, and the long arc between harm and accountability. The man who believed time would protect him was very, very wrong. Time didn't erase what he did. It put it in stasis, and it waited. And the justice system caught up. And April Tinsley, a child who should have grown up, who should have had a future, is remembered not just as a victim, but as a reminder that some stories don't end when the world goes quiet. They end when someone finally listened long enough to hear the truth. And to the point of the determination of those who pursued this case and pushed it forward, April Tinsley is remembered not because of how her life ended, but because her life mattered enough that it was never abandoned to silence. And that's what remains. Thank you for staying with this story. Thank you for listening carefully and for holding space for a life that deserved far more than it was given. Stories like this always ask something of the listener: patience, empathy, and the willingness to sit with discomfort rather than looking away. That choice matters more than you might realize. You've been listening to me, your tale teller, at Stories Fables Ghostly Tales. If this episode moved you, challenged you, or stayed with you longer than expected, that's exactly what it's meant to do. These stories aren't told to shock, they are told to remember. And before you go, a heartfelt thank you to those who helped me make this space possible. And if you are like these legends and want to support this podcast and me directly, visit my Patreon, www.patreon.com/SFGT. You can reach out to me directly on Patreon or via email, storiesfablesghostlytales@gmail.com. And if you have any time spare, I would appreciate a Spotify, iTunes, or any review that you have time to sit down and write for my silly self. Thank you very, very much for your support. Be sure to let me know what your next suggested true crime episode should cover. Now, to my amazing Ode Night Tea Titan, the ever-brilliant, the shining beacon of light, my friend, Matto Star.
Matto Star!
And boy, oh, am I lucky to have a friend like you, legend. And Matto, your support is a steady presence in the background, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but without it, everything would feel less grounded. You're part of what allows these stories to be told slowly, carefully, and with the respect they deserve. And Ode Night Tea is something you drink when you're willing to sit with depth, when you're not rushing, when you're prepared for something rich, complex, and lingering. And that feels like the right way to describe the kind of support you offer. Thoughtful, intentional, and deeply appreciated. Thank you for believing in this work, my work, the podcast, and for helping hold the space open for stories that matter. Thank you, you absolute living legend. And for being my friend, Matto. Have an absolutely amazing week ahead of you, and expect to hear from me via the Patreon comments. Thanks, legend. And now to my white tea warlords.
White Tea Warlords!
3 in number, the wonderful Lysosaurus Rex, Maya, and Sangeetha. And white tea is subtle. It doesn't overwhelm, it doesn't shout, but it's powerful in its own quiet way, and that's exactly what your support represents, legends. Lysosaurus, thank you for being steady and present, a stalwart of my support, showing up in a way that feels reliable and grounded. That kind of consistency is rare, and it matters to me immensely. May the gym be as steady and dedicated as your soul is to all your friendships and how you support your friends. Please do another 5 reps of the hardest exercise you've got going on at the gym at the moment. Have an absolutely fantastic week ahead, Leza. It is a joy to have your friendship and your support. Thank you, mate. To my next white tea warlord, Maya, the Queen of Cats, thank you for the warmth you bring into this space. Support like yours feels encouraging, like a friend that nods along saying, keep going, it's worth it. The kind of encouragement that carries a lot of weight. Thank you, Maya. You truly have fantastic feline qualities and a curiosity that I can only think is matched by your unwavering support. Thank you so, so much, Maya, and have a wonderful week ahead. And Sangeetha the Seer, thank you for the calm strength you bring, the kind of support that's thoughtful, intentional, and quietly powerful. It's the kind that reminds me why slowing down and telling these stories properly is always the right choice. And let's just say you're always a couple of steps ahead of me, Sangeetha. I think you know why. Together, the 3 of you form something balanced, steady, gentle, and strong. You make this space feel supported without ever feeling rushed or pressured. And to my Ode Tea Titan, wonderful Matto Star, you are an everlasting gobstopper of support and kindness, and I'm grateful to know you. And now on to my Earl Grey enforcers and all tiers thereafter. I am lucky to have Chad Warren, Peter Raffaelli, Just Heather, Juicebox Andy, Divided by Zero, Paige Kramer, Seductive Smiles, Jane Gumnick, Michael Krupp, and Steve the Creeper. Absolutely wonderful to know you all. And thank you for your support. And legends, if you want your name called out over the radio waves, any support that heads my way via Dollar Dues will have your name enshrined in every episode. If you want thank yous directly to you as well over the radio waves, feel free to explore the white tier, warlord tier. Now, my friends, until next time, take care of each other, hold space for the stories that matter, and remember, some truths don't fade with time. They wait for us to listen. Until next we meet. Bye for now.